And when I look backward, there were things I had wish I had done. There were things I had wish I hadn't done. There were things I wish I had done differently. Regret feels terrible, right? I don't like experiencing regret. It's not like I relish it. I hate it. Regret is ubiquitous. Everybody has regrets. It's one of the most common emotions that human beings have. I realize that everybody wanted to talk about regret. And so why do you have this emotion that makes you feel bad? And the answer is that it's there for a reason. That if we treat our regrets right, they're good for us. Regret, reckoned with properly, can help make you a better negotiator. It can help make you a better strategist. It can help you avoid cognitive biases. It can help you find more meaning in life.
I read the book, and I think your commentary here makes it even more, it amplifies what's in the book about, my view is anyone listening today, it's well worth your time.
That's a very strong signal. That is telling you something. You can't just put your fingers in your ears and try to blot it out. When people tell you what they regret the most, they're telling you what they value the most.
Welcome, Daniel, and thanks for taking time to have the discussion today. Your book, The Power of Regrets, or I should say your most recent one, I'm holding it up so people can see it, Power of Regret, I think has some very interesting aspects as it relates to certainly how independents and entrepreneurs think about, how they're wired and the regrets that they may have. I've spent my life helping white-collar professionals understand about taking risk, et cetera. So I think your four core regrets are right on point in terms of somebody in my sphere of influence, if you were, sphere of influence, in terms of how they think about what's going on in both their personal and their professional life. And so maybe I just start with a little bit of context from you on, Power of Regret is not your first book. I think you wrote, the Free Agent Nation like 20 years ago or something, right? Before other people were thinking about the gig economy. So kudos to you. But let's start with The Power of Regret and get some context from you on why you write it, what you learn, and we'll start to talk about how people maybe apply your learnings.
Sure. So why did I write it? I wrote it, Miles, largely because I had regrets of my own. And excuse me, I was trying to make sense of them. I was at a point in my life that all of us get to eventually, where you realize you have some mileage on you. And when you have mileage on you, you look backward. And when I look backward, there were things I had wish I had done. There were things I had wish I hadn't done. There were things I wish I had done differently. And I knew that, it sort of made me a little uneasy, or maybe more than a little uneasy. And I knew that nobody wanted to talk about regret. But I very sheepishly mentioned these regrets to some people. And I realized that everybody wanted to talk about regret, that everybody was sitting around waiting for permission to talk about this emotion. And that took me on this exploration over a few years, looking at the science of regret and doing some research on my own. Now, very, very quickly to answer your question about what I learned. So what we learned from 60 years of research on this emotion. So this is not something that is new to the field of science. Economists and game theorists began studying regret during the Cold War. There's research in economics, there's research in cognitive science, there's research in social psychology, there's research in developmental psychology. And what it tells us very clearly is that regret is ubiquitous. Everybody has regrets. It's one of the most common emotions that human beings have. I mean, truly, it is everywhere. We have a lot of pretty good evidence showing that it is arguably the most common negative emotion that people have. It's one of the most common emotions of any kind that people have. And that raises a pretty interesting kind of weird puzzle, which is that regret feels terrible, right? I don't like experiencing regret. It's not like I relish it. I hate it. And so why do you have this emotion that makes you feel bad? Why would something that makes you feel bad be so widespread? And the answer is, which comes from research, especially here in social psychology, is that if we treat our regrets right, they're good for us. That it's there for a reason.
Sure.
That regret, the regret can clarify what we value and instruct us on how to do better. For independence, there are a huge number of very more specific granular benefits to regret. There's research in social psychology saying that regret, reckoned with properly, can help make you a better negotiator. It can help make you a better strategist. It can help you avoid cognitive biases. It can help you find more meaning in life. And that's, as an independent myself and as someone who, like you, has been playing around with independence for a very long time, those are central.
Right.
So that's what we know about the science of it. Happy to talk more about those 4 regrets, but also equally happy to shut up for a moment so you can talk.
Yeah, before we jump to the 4, because I'm very interested in those, obviously, and I thought they were insightful. Is there a predisposition for people to try to ignore or put regrets out of their mind? Because it's not fun to think about regrets, because that's kind of the learning aspect I'm getting at, right? So you often talk about people say, fail fast, learn from your failings, and keep going. It's a different, regrets might be different, but I can certainly see where people would be predisposed to ignore their regrets, or at least not want to talk about them. But if you're really into learning and growing as a person, that's one of the fundamentals, is understanding your regrets and why.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So when we think about predisposition, that's an interesting way to phrase it, because I think that we're all predisposed to have regrets. That is, the predisposition about regret is literally neurological, that regret is part of our cognitive machinery. Now, I think that the reason this is my own theory of the case here, that the reason people resist regret, I think that itself is kind of a learned behavior. I think that especially here in the United States, we're way over indexed on positivity. We think that we should have positive emotions all the time, that we should always look forward, never look back, be positive, not negative. And that is not quite right. That is actually not an effective recipe for living. We have negative emotions for a reason. And what we want to do is actually thread the needle a little bit. Now, I think it's true with failure. I'll get to that in a moment. We want to thread the needle a little bit. We don't want to ignore our regrets. That's a bad idea. And it's understandable that people who've been pelted with this message that you need to be positive all the time, who feel negative, say, "Oh my God, this is miswiring. I got to bat it away and not think about it." That's a very bad idea. We have 60 years of evidence saying that is not a recipe for effective work or effective living. However, because we haven't equipped people with the ways to deal with regret, you also risk the other side of that, which is that people get captured by their regret. They get weighed down by their regrets. They ruminate in their regrets. That's really bad too. What we want to do is confront our regrets, use them as signal, use them as information, approach them analytically. And I think it's a first cousin of failure, Miles. But the thing is, like this mantra, fail fast. There is a not insignificant dollop of bullshit in that when it actually plays out, especially in organizations. They preach that, but when people actually do fail, they get clobbered. And and so people have learned that, and they don't want to fail. And when you're out on your own, failure is actually scarier. So the thing about regret versus failure is that regret is an emotion and failure is an action. So it's a little bit different. But I actually think that what we want to do is actually we don't want to ignore, we don't want to wallow, we want to think. That's what we want to do when it comes to regret, and I also think also failure.
Yeah, very very good connection between the two. So I think we've established why, recognizing that we all have regrets and maybe understanding them is a smart and useful idea. So I think that's a good link to your 4 core regrets that you talk about. Because at least when I read the book, it helped me kind of think through. I hear regret, but then your framing, I think, helps people analyze the types of regrets that they would have. So maybe say more about the 4 regrets.
Well, I think that the one of the surprises to me, and I'll tell you how I got there, is that not only does regret so regret is ubiquitous. Regret, if we treat it right, can help us do a lot better on a lot of things. But also, regret clarifies what we value, and this ends up being incredibly important. And the way I got there was that I just collected a huge amount of regrets. I set up something called the World Regret Survey about a little over 18 months ago, and I've collected regrets from around the world. We now have a database of over 24,000 regrets from people in 109 countries. It's nuts. And what I found, exactly as you say, is that around the world, people seem to have the same four kinds of regrets. I'll quickly go through them. And I think that they relate very strongly to independence. They really do. And we can talk, double click on that. So,
Sure.
Foundation regrets. Foundation regrets are small decisions you make early that add up to bad consequences later. I spent too much and saved too little. I didn't take care of my health, and now I'm woefully out of shape. Foundation regrets are if only I'd done the work. Boldness regrets, huge here, and for the population you're talking about.
Right.
Boldness regrets are you're at a juncture in your life. You can play it safe. You can take the chance. And when we don't take the chance, not all the time, but most of the time, we regret it. And this is true in every domain of life, but it's really true in this domain of life. I stayed in a lackluster job rather than setting out on my own. That is one of the most common regrets that we have around the world. Third category, moral regrets. If only I'd done the right thing. You're at a juncture in your life. You can do the right thing. You can do the wrong thing. When we do the wrong thing, again, not all of us, but most of us end up regretting it, whether it is cheating on our spouse, whether it is bullying somebody, whether it's taking the low road in a business deal. And finally, last but not least, there's our connection regrets, which are if only I had reached out. These are about relationships, not only romantic relationships, but the full suite of relationships in our lives. They sometimes will come apart. Those relationships often come apart in undramatic ways. And we want to reach out. We don't. And then we regret it. And so when we look at these things, so we got a foundation, if only I'd done the work, boldness, if only I'd taken the chance, moral, if only I'd done the right thing, and connection, if only I'd reached out. The remarkable universality all over the world. And these regrets tell us something. They tell us what people value.
So, it's interesting. Couple things I'll just highlight. So I often say that, and I'd like to get your perspective on this, that for many people, the right decisions are the hardest decisions for them to make. And it sounds
in what regard?
Their gut is telling them. I think it has mostly to do with the connection, probably, in boldness. So regrets. So they're sitting there feeling like I know I should take this action, but I'm not going to because it's not popular. I'll get criticized. I'm not.
Great point.
If I take that action, I'm going to show my authentic self, and I don't want people to know. There's a saying that perception is reality. I think that nothing could be truer when it comes to one's own well-being, which is when you're projecting that you're something that you're not. That's a really painful way to go through life. And so there's something here about the regrets to me about this whole thing about you got to make the right decisions. And they're really hard because it's actually a perceived regret, but you live with a constant regret for not having taken and made a decision. Is what I'm getting. I
mean, I'll be your hallelujah chorus on that analysis. Absolutely. One of the things that you see in the language of people's regrets, and also this goes back to 100 years ago when I wrote Free Agent Nation, is the concern that people have for authenticity, right. The sense that people are squelching who they are. That is when for that book, Free Agent Nation, I traveled around America 20 years ago interviewing people who had made this decision. These are the pioneers, and people use terms like this. I wanted to leave that job at that big operation, that big organization, because every time I went into work, I had to put on a game face. I had to put on a mask. I had to be somebody who I really wasn't. And then you also hear regrets about people. So fast forward 20 years to the regret research, you hear the language people using things like, they literally use the language of authenticity. They use the word authentic. I couldn't be
Right.
I regret not being my authentic self. You hear language like, I regret living someone else's life. Legions, dozens and dozens and dozens around the world. I regret caring too much about what other people think and not enough about who I really was. You hear language about powerful all over. You hear the phrase you hear the phrase "speak up" or "speaking up." I wish I had spoken up. I wish and I think that impulse is. I think that impulse is part of who we are. I mean, we as human beings want to be part of a community. We want a sense of belonging, but we also want to be self-determined. We want to be who we are. We want to belong, there's no question. And we want affiliation, no question. But we want some degree of self-determination. We don't want to be controlled by others.
So look, we've done 12 years of research in the world of independence and what they're kind of how they're wired and how they're feeling. And one of the things that we've seen is that independents are happier, healthier, and more financially secure than when they were a full-time employee. And I attribute that largely to their ability to express their own authenticity. Like the happiness factor has to do with them being freed from this not being authentic. So I think it's really interesting. I mean, you got at least 2 books that independents should actually read, which is Free Agent Nation as well as The Power of Regret. There's about a 20 year.
In my view, I think independents should read all 7, or at the very least they should buy. Maybe they don't need to read them. They should buy all 7. I think they should buy. There you go.
That sounds like a true entrepreneur. Very good. Yeah, I like it. So what's next for you? You've just finished Power of Regret. You got anything on the horizon you want to share with the independents, or?
No, I'm just trying to figure out what is next. But let me say another word about these 4 core regrets and why I think that they matter, because they tell us something profound, and it's something I got to very slowly in this research. When people, to oversimplify a bit, but not too much, when people tell you what they regret the most, they're telling you what they value the most. So this is really important to think about. So just, if you think about, let's say you have somebody who has a regret about, as we were talking about before, about, I was at a meeting 5 years ago and I wish I had spoken up. I wish I had said what I really thought. Okay. And someone has that regret from something 5 years from 5 years ago or 10 years ago. All right. You just think about all the things that you did, any of us did last week. Okay. You and I happen to be talking on a Monday.
Right.
Think about like all the decisions you made and actions you took on Friday. Okay. A couple days ago. Most of them you don't even freaking remember. Right. I mean, I don't remember most of what happened on Friday. Right. I made all kinds of decisions. I'm sure I took various actions. I'm sure I barely remember them. And it's like 48 hours later. All right. And so if you do something or say something or don't do something or don't say something a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and not only do you remember it, it makes you feel bad. That's a very strong signal. That is telling you something. You can't sustain. So you can't just put your fingers in your ears and try to blot it out. And so what these regrets tell us is, in some ways, a kind of a photographic negative or reverse image of what people really value. Foundation regrets. We value stability. And, I'll give you an example for independence. There is something to be said, like independents value stability. They create it on their own. They don't rely on an external source for it, but they require stability. They require, so I'll give you an example for me. I've been working on my own for over 20 years. I have never had an office outside of my house. All right. I'm talking to you from the garage behind my house in Washington, D.C. For the first few years, I worked on the third floor of a different house. Anytime anybody wants to go out on their own, they get, whether they want it or not, they get my low overhead lecture first.
Right.
Why? Because that's prudent. Because I want some stability. I went out on my own because I wanted to be bolder. I wanted to do my own thing. I wanted to be self-determined. I wanted to be authentic. I didn't want to be controlled. I wanted to do my own stuff. But I also have a family to feed. And so
Right.
I want some degree of stability. So foundation regrets are about stability. Boldness regrets, I think, are about our desire to learn and grow and not waste our vanishingly short time on this planet. There are too many people who look up after 40 years, 30 years of a kind of a lackluster career where they weren't authentic, where they weren't self-determined, and say, crap, I totally blew it. I don't want to be that person. Moral regrets. I think most of us want to do the right thing. And one of the things that I saw, again, going back in time 100 years ago to Free Agent Nation, is that people were being, in large organizations, were being pressured a little bit to do things that weren't perfectly consistent with their values. And they didn't want to do that. And then finally, connection regrets. It's like, I've been on my own for, as I said, 20 plus years. I have deep connections to people. That's a huge part about. That's a huge part about my work and my life. It's just that, I have to be more intentional about those connections, and I have to foster them myself. I don't wait till, 17 people from the accounting department come in for a slice of face cake. That's not my form of belonging and connection.
Right.
So. And so all these things, what do we want out of life? We want some stability. We want a chance to learn and grow. We want it to do the right thing. And we want, connections and belonging in relationships. That's it. And so again, we have this emotion that all of us, like, understandably kind of want to resist, that we've been indoctrinated to say is dangerous for us. And yet it ends up being perhaps the most revealing emotion that we have. It is giving us very clear instructions on how to lead a life of meaning and significance.
Look, I got to tell you, I read the book, and I think your commentary here makes it even more, it amplifies what's in the book about focusing on the regrets, understanding them, to understand yourself. And,
absolutely.
It just can't be overstated. So, my view is, anyone listening today, it's well worth your time to take and, try to understand yourself by spending time in the book and understanding the regrets and what it might mean for you. I really, like I said, I've found independence to be more authentic, perhaps than non-independence, but we all can get more depth and breadth in how we view ourselves. And, once you understand yourself, you can be more authentic. So praise to you for writing the book and, kind of scratching that itch for people trying to understand themselves a bit more. So I think it's fantastic.